Say, this your first trip east, kid?
Yeah, this is my first trip over the road.
Ever heard of the Horseshoe Curve?
No, what's that?
Well, the railroad bends around the mountain, just like a horseshoe. Look over there. We'll be on the other side of the valley in a few minutes.
What a beautiful view. Look, there's an old steam locomotive sitting behind a fence.
Yeah, that's old number 1361.
Did you ever run that thing?
Sure did, kid. Back when I hired on the railroad, that's all we had.
Was it hard to run one?
You bet. They were cold in winter and, well, hot as hell in the summer. You knew you put in a good day's work when you got off one of those things. Oh, remember that tunnel we went through a while back?
Yeah, the one you called the Glitzen Tunnel?
Back in the steam days, the smoke and heat would be so bad that you'd have to cover your nose and mouth with a wet handkerchief to keep from suffocating. Steam engines were dirty, too. I could leave Pittsburgh with clean overalls and get off at Altoona looking like a miner.
I guess you were glad to see the diesel locomotives come along.
You better believe it, kid. Our job has been made a lot easier. Yes, locomotive technology has come a long way since the days of steam power. Introduction of the diesel-electric locomotive has provided the railroad industry with a clean, dependable form of motive power that has saved millions of dollars in labor and maintenance costs. Let's take a look at this remarkable machine to see how it operates. The heart of the diesel-electric locomotive is the diesel engine power plant. Developed by Dr. Rudolf Diesel nearly a century ago, the diesel is an internal combustion engine sparked by heat created by compression of air within the cylinders. The diesel engine drives a generator creating electricity, which is sent to electric traction motors riding on each axle. Each traction motor transmits its power to the axle by a series of gears that mesh with each other. This in turn drives the locomotive. The traction motors, gearing and wheels are mounted on a device known as a truck assembly. There are two of these, one at each end of the locomotive. There are two types of locomotive trucks, 2-axle and 3-axle. A pair of 3-axle trucks give a locomotive two extra traction motors that allow it to dig in and pull on steep grades. For this reason, Conrail and many other railroads use them to pull heavy trains, such as coal and iron ore. In addition to driving the main generator, the diesel engine also operates an air compressor. This creates air pressure, which is used to power the brakes on both the locomotive and the freight cars that it pulls. Flexible hoses located on the end of each locomotive and freight car allows air pressure from the locomotive air compressor to be sent to the brake system under each car. These are hooked together to form a continuous air path extending throughout the train. In addition to operating the braking system, air pressure from the compressor also operates other components, such as the sanders, bell, and warning horn. Since steel wheels and rails can be very slippery when wet, sand must sometimes be used to start a train. Dried sand is placed in a container located in the nose and long hood of the locomotive. Air pressure from the compressor forces the sand through small pipes that open onto the rail just ahead of the leading wheels. Warning devices such as the bell and horn are also operated by air pressure from the compressor. This equipment, along with the diesel engine, generator, and air brake system, are controlled by the operator using a control stand located in the locomotive cab. The control stand in the lead locomotive can be used to remotely operate other locomotives that may be needed to power the train. Electrical signals are sent from the control stand through a jumper cable and receptacle to the trailing locomotives. This allows the operator to monitor and control their diesel engines, brakes, and other components.
Hey, that's really interesting. Now I know how one of these things works. By the way, when did they invent the diesel locomotive?
Well, you ever see a trolley car, kid?
Yeah, that's how I got to work back in Pittsburgh.
Well, that's where it all got started. The trolley car that once dominated our cities around the turn of the century was the first to use electric traction motors to drive geared axles. A few years later, as more powerful traction motors were developed, the railroad industry turned to this principle. A new type of electric locomotive was created for service in tunnels and other places where smoke would be a hazard. These early locomotives received their power from an outside electrical source, such as an energized overhead wire or an auxiliary third power rail running alongside the tracks. By World War I, General Electric had developed a new system that did away with the outside power source by creating onboard electricity with a generator turned by a gasoline engine. This was quickly adopted by a number of railroads that were interested in propelling passenger cars on branch lines, where it was too expensive to operate a steam engine. During the 1920s, New York and several other large cities passed strict anti-pollution laws aimed at cutting down on smoke created by steam locomotives. Fortunately, General Electric had adapted the relatively new diesel engine to their existing propulsion system and introduced the first successful diesel-electric locomotive. A few years later, railroads introduced streamlined passenger trains to win back passengers lost to the automobile. The diesel engine and electric transmission were used almost exclusively to power them. By the mid-1940s, diesel locomotive technology had advanced considerably. Because of refinements to the diesel engine and electrical components, the diesel locomotive was finally able to economically replace the steam engine. Housed in a sleek, streamlined car body, these locomotives were bought in great numbers by the railroad industry. Soon they were handling most American freight and passenger trains. Unfortunately, because of the way they were constructed, the streamlined types were very hard to repair due to the cramped workspace within the car body. Moreover, train crews found them very difficult to back up due to their single-end design. After the railroads discovered the disadvantages of the streamlined type, several locomotive builders developed a new design, which became known as the road switcher type. Featuring a bi-directional design, which allowed it to be used in almost any type of service, the road switcher was also easier to maintain due to an outside walkway and an easy-to-remove hood that covered its internal components. By the 1970s, the early road switcher types had evolved into the modern high-horsepower machines now used by Conrail. Possessing greatly improved generators, traction motors, and engines, these locomotives are far more powerful and dependable than their predecessors. So that's how they developed, kid.
Okay, I know how the diesel developed, but what about the ones we're riding on?
What else do you want to know about them?
Well, for example, who builds them? And are the road switcher types the only types still being used? And what about their safety? I heard that the government comes around and checks up on how well Conrail maintains them.
Wait a minute, one question at a time. Today, diesel locomotives are built by General Electric and the electromotive division of General Motors. Aside from their diesel engine, they are essentially similar in design. There is, however, a major difference in the diesel engine found in each type. All General Electric locomotives use an engine that requires 4 strokes to complete a power cycle. General Motors locomotives, however, use an engine that requires only 2 strokes to complete the same cycle. Although the road switcher is the dominant type of locomotive found on Conrail today, a smaller type known as a yard switcher is also used quite extensively. Built by General Motors, these low-horsepower locomotives are equipped with operating cabs designed to provide the high degree of visibility needed to safely switch cars in a freight yard. Safety and reliability, of course, are a prime concern to Conrail. Locomotives receive regular inspections for defects that could cause an accident or an unexpected breakdown in service. These inspections are mandated by federal law and are enforced by inspectors from the Federal Railroad Administration. Well, kid, we're coming into Altoona. I know a good place to eat across the tracks from the passenger station. Hope you learned something about the locomotives we use.
Sure did. Thanks a lot.
Hey, watch yourself getting off.